Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan and welcome to Words in Time. Now in today's video I'm going to be talking about Shards of Earth, book 1 of the final Architect trilogy, a space opera series by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Now this is the second book I've read by Adrian Tchaikovsky. The first was Children of Time. If you haven't seen the review yet, go watch that or check out my top 10 sci-fi reads of 2021 because I absolutely loved Children of Time. And it set the bar pretty high for Shards of Earth. So, what is the premise of this new series? Well, Earth has been destroyed by aliens. A powerful species known as the Architects have ripped Earth apart, and decades later, humans are now living on spaceships and other planets. But they still have the lingering questions of where did the Architects come from? Why did they destroy Earth? And will they come back? So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the style. If you saw my last review for A Memory Called Empire, I described it as a space opera, but not an epic space opera, because it was hyper-focused on a few characters and themes. Well, Shards of Earth is an epic space opera. There are so many characters, planets, species, technologies, organizations, spaceships. If you want your sci-fi to go big or go home, well, for better or worse, this goes big. And you might be thinking, what do I mean by for better or worse? Well, some of the positives are that it has incredibly rich world building, an interesting mystery, and one concept that I'll talk a bit more about later on that I absolutely loved. But some of the possible downsides to cramming so much into one book is that it's not necessarily all that easy to convey all of that information seamlessly. I love the ambition, but I had a few minor issues with the execution. There were a few chapters that felt a little info dumpy, but there were others where I felt like I wanted a bit more context. To give you an example, there were a few chapters where I felt a bit out of the loop, found it a little bit hard to understand, and then later on, we were given the information required to understand what was going on earlier. And I don't need to be spoon-fed everything up front. I enjoy the intrigue of a mystery, but that missing information was actually common knowledge within the universe. The characters had that backstory. It was just unknown to me, unknown to the readers. So when we did get those reveals, it felt like we were being given to them by the writer, as in Tchaikovsky said, okay, I'll let you know in on the secret now, as opposed to it feeling like we were organically finding those reveals, solving those mysteries, uncovering those secrets through the narrative, through the adventure of the characters themselves. So it lost just a little bit of the immersiveness as we kind of went back and forth with those information reveals. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the structure and characters, and these two are linked because the story is told through 4 POVs. And of those 4, I really enjoyed 2 of them, I somewhat enjoyed 1 of them, and I didn't really connect with the 4th. And I think for me the problem with that 4th one was it was quite separate from everything else that was going on. I didn't think that character was really justified in having a POV of their own, but once Tchaikovsky had chosen the POV style, in order for us to get from what's happening over here to something that's happening over here, we do need a POV over here, or else how would these characters know what's going on? So I think that was part of the problem of choosing this style, this structure of the different POVs, because I didn't know how necessary it really was to begin with, because the other characters, for the most part, spend a lot of time together. So as we switch back and forth between the POVs, a lot of times we're just moving to a different part of the spaceship. If I were to compare it to The Expanse, which uses a similar style, those POVs, those storylines are quite separate, and they tend to, if they do converge later in the book towards the end, which makes it much more satisfying. So I didn't have an issue with the choice per se, just perhaps the execution or whether it was particularly necessary to this specific story. Now, regardless of the structure, I did like the characters in this book. As I mentioned, there were 2 in particular that I really connected with. Outside of the main characters, there were some other characters that I found pretty interesting too, although I did find it a little tough to keep track of them all. I will admit that I read a large chunk of this book at an airport while my flight was delayed, and I'm sure many of you have been in a similar situation. That can be a little bit mentally exhausting, so I'll give the book a little bit of the benefit of the doubt here, but I'll give you an example. There was a scene where I kind of lost track of the dialogue between the characters. And I went back and reread it, and within less than a page, 7 different characters had dialogue. And they weren't just kind of going around the room all sharing their thoughts on something. They were all shouting over the top of each other, arguing back and forth. And I thought, well, no, upon reread, it's certainly not incomprehensible, but no wonder I got lost. And I feel like that is just representative, a little bit emblematic of just kind of how messy this book can be at times. I'm going to try to give you an analogy, and we'll see if this works. You may have watched some films by an auteur. The filmmaking process is very collaborative, but there are certain people, certain filmmakers, writer-directors that you can tell have had a pretty significant influence over the vision and the execution of the vision in that film. And the studio has pretty much let them run with it, okay? Not too many focus groups, not too many notes from the executives. It's their vision. And you watch it and you think, this is creative, this is brilliant, this is out of the box, it's nuts. And then you also think, that's kind of what made it great. But at the same time, if they'd have just simplified a few things, just trimmed a few others, then this could have been even better. So it's kind of a catch-22. I don't know what the writing and editing process was for this book, but it kind of feels like Adrian Tchaikovsky just came up with a bunch of like awesome, crazy, wide scope ideas and just crammed it all into the book and gave it to us. Here we go, this is what you get. And I think a lot of people listening to this might think, that's awesome. I want a completely unfettered look into the brilliant mind of Adrian Tchaikovsky. And some of you might be thinking, that sounds interesting, there's probably some good stuff in there, but I also value structure, direction, momentum, and will it hit those beats for me? Well, I think it's going to be up to your personal preference to kind of sift through this and see which aspects work for the book for you. You might not find it as messy as I did. So I talked about a few things in the book that didn't quite work for me, but that's partially because some of those aspects are a little bit easier to talk about spoiler-free. But there is one aspect that definitely landed for me, and that was the concept of unspace. I'm not going to tell you anything about it, but if you're the type of sci-fi reader that likes big ideas, weird concepts, the type of things that takes your mind to new places, I think you're going to enjoy this just as much as I did, and I think it's going to be one of your favorite aspects of the book. It's something that really intrigued me and became more important to the story as we went on, and I started to like the story more and more because of that. I think this concept alone took a book that was a little bit hit or miss to a book that's still a little bit hit or miss, but with a home run. I think it is absolutely awesome and definitely something that I want to follow more in the series to come. So overall, what are my thoughts on Shards of Earth? Well, ultimately, it did not live up to Children of Time, but that's kind of an insane bar for it to clear because Children of Time is one of my favorite books of all time. So let's put Children of Time to the side for a minute and just focus on Shards of Earth. I think, in the end, there are a few things that I liked, there are a few things that I didn't like, and there was one thing that I absolutely loved. I think a lot of the setup, a lot of the world building, some of that info dumping has hopefully been taken care of in Book 1. I think Book 1 reaches a somewhat natural breaking point, somewhat of a conclusion to the initial story arc, but there's a lot that is set up for Book 2. And I think in Book 2, if we can focus on some of the more interesting aspects of Book 1, the things that I enjoyed the most, then I think there's still some potential for the series. So putting all of that into a rating, I'm going to give Shards of Earth a 7.5 out of 10. I definitely enjoyed it, and I am interested in the second book, although admittedly, I did anticipate that being a day one read for me, whereas now, I might not pick up the hardcover on day one. I may wait for a few reviews or wait for the paperback to come out a little bit later on. I'm very interested to hear your guys' thoughts on this one. If you've read the book, what did you think of it? Are you excited for the rest of the series? And if you haven't read it, does this sound like something that might be for you? I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe, because as always, there's more sci-fi content coming soon.